Gerard Manley Hopkins wrote a poem when one of his parishioners died. You hear in it both his reaction and his observations about the relationship that existed between the two. Randall had been a farrier. He shoed horses for a living. And after he became ill, it was a matter of months that he was in decline. Not only physically, but mentally as well. And Hopkins' duty was not to tend his body or his mind, but his soul. Although the three went together. And when the news came to him that Felix Randall had died, this is what went through his mind as he later set it down. Felix Randall the farrier. Oh, is he dead then? My duty all ended, who have watched his mold of man, big-boned and hardy, handsome, pining, till time when reason rambled in it, and some fatal for disorders fleshed there, all contended. Sickness broke him. Impatient he cursed at first, but mended, being anointed and all, though a heavenlier heart began some months earlier, since I had our sweet reprieve and ransom tendered to him. Ah well, God rest him all road ever he offended. This seeing of the sick endears them to us. Us too it endears. My tongue had taught thee comfort. Touch had quenched thy tears that touched my heart, child Felix. Poor Felix Randall. How far from then forethought of all thy more boisterous years, when thou at the random grim forge, powerful amidst peers, didst fettle for the great gray dray horse his bright and battering sandal. Here was a man who had trouble surrendering his strength as it was being taken from him. He didn't really have much choice about it. I get the feeling it might have been cancer that took him, but other things may have added to it, with some of the wasting away that can go with it. At first, Randall would have nothing of Hopkins' care. And it isn't clear in the poem whether he was cursing his illness or cursing the priest. Maybe both. Yet they walked eventually and steadily and together through the valley of the shadow of death. And along the way, they developed, I think, what may have been a mutual affection and shared growth in faith, the two of them. I can easily imagine Peter and Felix Randall as being two peas in a pod. I can see the farrier and the fisherman, both having pride in the physical work that they did and their ability to do it well. One of them steadying a horse and pounding out a horseshoe. The other hauling in heavy nets full of fish and stinking seaweed. I can see either of them giving off a sort of raw courage that takes care of the people around them. Whether it's a Randall grim at the forge among his peers, or whether it's Peter, protective of Jesus many times, but one time especially in Gethsemane as they were trying to arrest Jesus, and Peter reached in and he took out a knife and he sliced off the ear of an attacker trying to drag Jesus away, until Jesus told Peter to back down and reached out and healed the man's ear. In my experience, maybe in yours as well, people who do things like that, people like Felix Randall, people like Simon Peter, do not like having other people take care of them. In their minds, if somebody does something like that, it's a sign of weakness on their part. Sometimes a sign of laziness. There's embarrassment, maybe a little bit of guilt, and always a great deal of regret. So when Jesus, taking the role of a servant at the Last Supper he shares with his disciples, washes their feet, Peter is offended. It isn't only that Jesus is breaking convention and performing a task considered too menial for somebody like him. I get the feeling that there's something deeper going on. And as John describes the event, I think he does too. Peter doesn't stop Jesus from washing feet until he gets to him. And then Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." You're not going to do this. But Jesus insists. He says, "Unless I wash you, you have no share in me." It's both a confrontation and an odd exchange of affection. As much as we emphasize often in looking at this text, how Jesus is pointing out that it is absolutely vital for his followers to serve one another and to serve others, even as he has done. Washing feet, if it comes down to that. On the other side of it, there's another kind of humility that also comes into play. And it's the kind that Peter needed to learn. It is the ability to accept love from Jesus. It isn't our place to turn down the loving care that he offers. There's a kind of pride in that. that pushes his love away. In serving and in being served by Jesus, there is humility in both directions. There's a give and take that strengthens the relationship between us and him, as there was a give and a take between Hopkins and Randall, between Peter and Jesus. Real friendship, under any circumstances, grows where there is mutuality. And that includes friendship with the Lord. Hopkins said, "This seeing the sick endears them to us. Us too it endears." There's a give and there's a take. And sometimes in taking we give, and sometimes in giving we take, and sometimes in giving we give, and sometimes in taking. It all comes together somehow when it's held together by God's love. Peter, for all of his bluster, would fail Jesus at least 3 times that night. And I'm not just talking about the 3 times he denied him. I'm talking about 3 times. Once Jesus would ask him, along with James and John, to stay on the lookout while he prayed, and they fell asleep. Next, he was unable to stand by him when Jesus was arrested, and did what he did in a very bad way. Jesus was always telling people, turn the other cheek, not draw a switchblade on somebody. And then finally, he denied even knowing Jesus when he was standing in the courtyard of the high priest's house and Jesus was on trial. 3 times. 3 times that night, he failed Jesus. And yet, there was a sort of preparation for that as Jesus washed his feet in the upper room. It was a moment when he had to acknowledge his need, his insufficiency, his humanness. And it was a moment when Jesus answered it. Preparation. Preparation to be himself, and knowing who he was, and acknowledging, at least in front of the other disciples, if not everybody else, who he really and truly was. Jesus offered him his friendship, his care, and it didn't go away. He would find how much he needed that later that night and in the days to come. But that moment when he said, "Oh, if you have to wash, not my feet only, but my hands and my head as well." That moment was where he also acknowledged Jesus' love and care. And it would get him through, because the time would come when Jesus would be raised, but they would have to see one another again and repair the relationship. I don't suggest a renewed commitment to service is the only thing present in this story. I suggest that there's also room for a renewed commitment simply to being with the Lord. And I would encourage everybody, long before an illness approaches, long before you find yourself in some crisis situation, but even right now, wherever you happen to be, whatever's going on, if you can just take a moment or two, maybe longer, but at least a moment, to spend some quiet time with Jesus. No agenda, no words, silence, just being together as friends. And know that that is a constant. Amen.